Welcome back to Bargirl Baddies. Today's story is different from our usual tales of 20-somethings chasing love and adventure. This one's about Gerald, a 70-year-old retiree from Victoria, British Columbia, who spent 40 years as a civil engineer before deciding that Canada's winters, loneliness after his wife's passing, and the rising cost of living were no longer worth enduring. He'd watched enough YouTube channels about expat retirement in Thailand to convince himself that Chiang Mai was the answer to everything. Safer than North America, cheaper, warmer, full of smiling faces and respect for elders. He thought he'd found paradise. He thought he'd finally cracked the code to a dignified, peaceful retirement. And for about 18 months, he was right. Until the day he woke up in a hospital bed with no memory of how he got there, no phone, no wallet, and a medical bill that would drain what was left of his pension. This is a story about trust, about vulnerability, about what happens when you're old and alone in a place that looks like heaven, but operates by rules you'll never fully understand. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if you or someone you know retired abroad, hit that like button and subscribe. You're not alone in wondering if the dream is worth the risk. Alright, here's Gerald's story, in his own words. My name is Gerald Patterson, and I'm 70 years old. For most of my life, I thought I had it all figured out. I worked for the provincial government in British Columbia for 42 years, designing water treatment systems and bridges. The kind of work that doesn't make you famous, but keeps cities running. I had a pension, a house in Victoria with a view of the harbour if you leaned out the upstairs window just right, and a wife named Linda, who I loved more than I knew how to say. We had 2 daughters, Emily and Sarah, who grew up and moved away like daughters do. Emily went to Toronto for law school and never came back. Sarah ended up in Calgary with an oil executive husband and 2 kids I saw maybe twice a year. That was fine. That was life. We didn't expect them to stay. Linda and I had plans for retirement. We were going to travel, see Europe, maybe take a cruise down to South America. We talked about it over breakfast every Sunday, circling destinations in travel magazines, laughing about how we'd finally have time to do all the things we put off for 40 years. But life doesn't care about your plans. She got diagnosed with ovarian cancer at 64, stage 3. They gave her 2 years. She made it 3.5, but those last 18 months were brutal. Watching someone you love waste away, watching them lose their hair and their strength and their hope, it changes you. It carves something out of you that never grows back. She died on a Tuesday morning in February. I was holding her hand. The hospice nurse said it was peaceful. I don't know if that's true or if that's just what they tell you. After the funeral, after the relatives went home, after the casseroles from the neighbours stopped showing up, I was alone in that house. Properly alone. The kind of alone where you can hear the refrigerator humming at 3 in the morning and it sounds like the saddest thing in the world. Emily and Sarah called once a week, usually on Sundays, out of duty more than anything. They had their own lives, their own problems. I didn't blame them, but those phone calls felt like checking a box. Like making sure the old man hadn't keeled over yet. I'd sit in the living room afterward, staring at the walls, wondering what the point of any of it was. I'd survived Linda. I had my pension, about $2,800 a month after taxes, enough to get by, not enough to feel alive. The house felt too big, the winters felt too cold. I'd go to the grocery store and realise I hadn't spoken to another human being in 4 days. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie in bed, thinking about all the things Linda and I never got to do, all the trips we never took, all the time we wasted working and saving for a future that never came. And I'd think about the fact that I was 70, that statistically I had maybe 10 or 15 years left if I was lucky, and I was spending them eating frozen dinners and watching the news alone. It felt like a waste. Like I'd worked my whole life for nothing. That's when the algorithm found me. I was on YouTube one night, probably looking up something boring like how to fix a leaky tap, and a video popped up in the recommendations. Retire in Thailand for $500 a month. I almost didn't click it. But I was bored, and lonely, and curious. The video showed this British guy, maybe 65, sitting on a balcony overlooking a tropical city, talking about how his pension went 3 times further in Chiang Mai than it did in the UK. How he ate out every day for less than the cost of a sandwich back home. How the weather was warm year-round. How the people were kind and respectful to elders. How he'd never felt more alive. I watched another video, then another. The algorithm kept feeding them to me. Channels with names like Retired and Thriving and Pension Paradise and Chiang Mai after 60. They all said the same thing. Thailand was cheap, safe, beautiful, and welcoming. You could live like a king on a modest pension. You could find community, purpose, a second chance at life. The locals smiled. The food was incredible. The temples were peaceful. It was everything the West wasn't anymore. It was warm, unaffordable, and full of possibilities. I started watching those videos every night. I'd sit there with a notebook, writing down tips. Which neighborhoods were best for expats? How to get a retirement visa? What the cost of living really looked like? How much you needed in the bank? I looked up health insurance options, found out I could get international coverage for about $200 a month. I researched condos and houses for rent, saw places for 10 or 12,000 baht a month, which worked out to less than 600 Canadian dollars. My mortgage was paid off. If I sold the house, I'd have a cushion. Even if I didn't, I could rent it out and live comfortably in Thailand on what was left. I started to believe it. I started to think maybe this was the answer. Maybe I didn't have to spend the rest of my life alone in Victoria, shuffling through grey streets, waiting to die. Maybe I could have an adventure. Maybe I could feel something again. Emily thought I was having a breakdown. When I told her I was thinking about retiring in Thailand, she went quiet on the phone. Then she said, "Dad, you don't even like spicy food." I told her it wasn't about the food. It was about feeling alive. She said I should see a therapist. Sarah was more direct. She said it sounded like a scam. That those YouTube channels were selling a fantasy. That old men got taken advantage of in places like that. I told her I wasn't some naive kid. I'd worked for the government for 4 decades. I knew how to be careful. She sighed and said, "Just don't do anything stupid, Dad." But I'd already made up my mind. I booked a one-way ticket to Chiang Mai for early October, right after the rainy season. I didn't sell the house, not yet, but I rented it out to a young couple for $1,800 a month. I packed 2 suitcases, said goodbye to the few friends I still had, and got on a plane. 14 hours to Vancouver, then another 12 to Bangkok, then a short flight north to Chiang Mai. By the time I landed, I'd been travelling for nearly 30 hours. I was exhausted, but when I stepped out of the airport into that warm, humid air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The first week was overwhelming in the best way. I stayed in a small guest house near the old city while I looked for a place to rent. The owner, a Thai woman in her 50s, spoke decent English and helped me figure out how to use the local transport app, where to buy a SIM card, which streets were safe to walk at night. Chiang Mai wasn't what I expected. It wasn't some rural village or chaotic Bangkok-style metropolis. It was a mid-sized city with a mix of ancient temples and modern cafes, bustling markets and quiet residential streets. The old city was surrounded by a moat and crumbling red brick walls. And inside were narrow lanes full of guest houses and restaurants and massage parlours. Outside the walls, the city sprawled in every direction, motorbikes weaving through traffic, street vendors grilling skewers of pork and chicken, the smell of lemongrass and chili and exhaust mixing in the heat. I found a house to rent in a quiet neighbourhood about 15 minutes from the old city. It was small, single-storey, with 2 bedrooms, a little kitchen, and a tiled courtyard out back. 12,000 baht a month, which worked out to about 580 Canadian dollars. The landlord was an older Thai man who spoke almost no English, but his daughter handled the paperwork and explained everything in careful, slow sentences. I paid 3 months up front, signed a contract I didn't fully understand, and moved in with my 2 suitcases and a feeling like I'd just done something reckless and wonderful. The first month was magic. I'd wake up every morning to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains, the sound of birds and motorbikes and someone's rooster a few houses over. I'd make instant coffee in my little kitchen, sit in the courtyard, and just breathe. The air was warm and thick, nothing like the cold, damp mornings in Victoria. The 1st to 500th go for walks, long meandering walks with no destination, just exploring. I'd find little markets tucked into side streets, temples with golden spires and monks in orange robes sweeping the courtyards, coffee shops where a cappuccino cost 30 baht, and the barista would smile and say, "Good morning" in English. I started going to the same cafe every morning, a tiny place run by a young Thai couple near the TAPA gate. They recognized me after the 3rd visit, started making my coffee as soon as I walked in. The husband, whose name was Somjai, would practice his English with me, asking about Canada, about snow, about why I'd come to Thailand. I'd tell him I was retired, that I wanted somewhere warm, somewhere peaceful. He'd nod and say, "Chiang Mai, good for you. Relax. No stress." I ate out every day because it was cheaper than cooking, and the food was incredible. Pad Thai from a street cart for 40 baht. Khao Soi, that rich coconut curry noodle soup, for 60 baht at a hole-in-the-wall place full of locals. Grilled chicken with sticky rice for 50 baht. I'd sit at plastic tables under fluorescent lights, the only foreigner in the room, and feel like I was finally living. People were kind. They'd smile, bring me extra napkins, ask if the food was too spicy. I'd say it was perfect even when my mouth was on fire, and they'd laugh. I met Pensri about 6 weeks in. I'd been taking my laundry to a small service near my house, just dropping off a bag and picking it up folded and clean 2 days later. It cost 60 baht, less than $3. The woman who ran it was in her early 50s, I guessed, with short hair and a quick smile. She spoke better English than most people I'd met, asked me how I was settling in, if I liked Chiang Mai, if I needed help with anything. Her name was Pensri. She said she'd worked in Bangkok for a few years, in a hotel, which is where she learned English. She'd moved back to Chiang Mai to be closer to her daughter and grandchildren after her husband passed away. We started chatting every time I dropped off laundry. Just small talk at first. She'd ask about Canada, about the cold, about why I'd left. I'd ask about her family, her life. She told me she had a daughter, 28 years old, who worked at a department store and had 2 young kids. She said it was hard to make ends meet on what the laundry business brought in, that everything was getting more expensive, but she was managing. She never asked me for anything. She was just friendly, warm, the kind of person who made you feel like you weren't a stranger anymore. One day she brought me a container of somtam, green papaya salad, that she'd made at home. She said she'd made too much and thought I might like to try it. It was delicious, fiery and tangy and fresh. I thanked her, told her it was the best I'd had. She beamed. After that, she'd bring me food every now and then. A little bag of mango sticky rice, some grilled pork skewers. I'd tried to pay her, but she'd wave me off, say it was nothing, just sharing. It felt good. It felt like friendship. I also met Dave around the same time. I'd gone to a visa agent's office to sort out my retirement visa paperwork, and there was this Australian bloke in the waiting room, maybe 68, 70, with a sunburned nose and a singlet that said Phuket beer. We got to talking. His name was Dave, and he'd been living in Chiang Mai for almost 10 years. He knew everything. Where to get the best exchange rates, which immigration offices were less of a hassle, which bars had cheap beer and good air conditioning. He invited me for a drink that night, said he'd show me around a bit. We went to a bar in the Nimman area, a place full of expats and digital nomads, white faces and American accents everywhere. Dave knew half the people there. He introduced me around, bought the first round, told stories about his early days in Thailand, the mistakes he'd made, the scams he'd avoided. He was funny, crude, the kind of guy who'd say anything after a few beers. But he was also generous, easy to be around. He became my drinking buddy, someone I'd meet up with once or twice a week to shoot the shit and feel like I had a social life again. For the first time since Linda died, I felt like I was part of something. Quant One had a routine. I had people who recognised me, who knew my name. Pendry would ask how my week was going when I dropped off laundry. Somchai would joke with me about the rainy season ending. Dave would text me on a Friday and say, "Fancy a beer, mate?" I wasn't lonely anymore. I was living. But there were small things. Little moments I didn't think much about at the time. Pendry asking me once how much my pension was, if it was enough to live comfortably. I'd laughed it off. Said it was enough. More than enough compared to how far money went here. She'd nodded, smiled, said that was good, that some foreigners struggled. Another time, she asked if I had savings back in Canada, if I'd sold my house. I told her I'd rented it out, that I had a bit put away just in case. She'd said that was smart, that it was good to have a backup plan. Dave mentioned once, half joking, that you had to be careful in Chiang Mai, that some locals saw old foreigners as walking ATMs, that women, especially, could be dangerous if they sensed you were lonely and had money. I'd brushed it off, told him everyone had been nothing but kind to me. He'd shrugged, said, "Just keep your wits about you, mate. Not everyone's who they seem." I didn't listen. I didn't want to listen, because for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. and I'd be damned if I was going to let cynicism ruin that. The comfortable rhythm I'd fallen into started to feel less like freedom and more like routine, somewhere around the 6-month mark. The morning walks, the same coffee shop, the same streets, the same faces. It wasn't bad. It was just familiar. The magic had faded into something steadier, quieter. I told myself this was what contentment looked like. This was what I'd come here for. A simple, peaceful life. No stress, no drama, just existing in the warmth. I started relying on Pensri more than I probably should have. It began innocently enough. She offered to pick up my blood pressure medication from the pharmacy one day when I mentioned I was feeling under the weather. I gave her the prescription and some cash, and she came back an hour later with the pills and the change. The next time I needed a refill, I just asked her. It was easier than navigating the pharmacy myself, easier than trying to explain what I needed in broken Thai. She never minded. She'd smile and say it was no trouble, that she was happy to help. Then it was other things. My landlord wanted to raise the rent, and I didn't understand the conversation we were having. Pendri came with me to translate, helped me negotiate it down to 13,000 baht instead of 15. When my internet stopped working, she called the provider for me, sat on the phone for 20 minutes sorting it out. When I needed to renew my visa, she walked me through the paperwork, made sure I had everything in order. I started giving her money for her time, just a little at first, 1,000 baht here, 500 there. She'd always protest, say it wasn't necessary, but I'd insist. It felt like the right thing to do. She was helping me navigate a country I'd never fully understand, and she deserved to be compensated for that. One afternoon, maybe 7 months in, she came by my house looking upset. I asked her what was wrong, and she hesitated, said it was nothing, just family troubles. I pressed a little, and she sat down in my courtyard, wringing her hands. She said her daughter had been having health problems, something with her kidneys, and the hospital bills were piling up. The public hospitals had long waiting lists, and the private ones were expensive. She said she was trying to help, but the laundry business wasn't bringing in enough, and her daughter's husband had lost his job. She wasn't asking me for anything. She was just venting, the way friends do. But I felt the pull. I felt the weight of her struggle sitting across from me, and I had money in the bank doing nothing. I told her I wanted to help. She said no, that she couldn't accept, that it was too much, I insisted. I gave her 10,000 baht, about 500 Canadian dollars. She cried. Actually cried. She hugged me, thanked me over and over, said I was a good man, that her daughter would be so grateful. I felt like a good man. I felt useful, needed. For the first time since Linda died, I felt like I mattered to someone. After that, Pensri started coming around more often. She'd stop by in the evenings, bring me dinner she cooked at home, sit and watch Thai dramas with me even though I didn't understand a word. She'd translate bits and pieces, laugh at my confusion, make it feel easy and comfortable. She became the closest thing I had to family in Chiang Mai, closer than Emily or Sarah, who still called once a week, but always seemed distracted, always had somewhere else to be. Dave, on the other hand, started pulling away. He'd cancel plans last minute, say he was busy or not feeling well. When we did meet up, he seemed distant, distracted. I asked him once if I'd done something to upset him. He said no, that he was just dealing with some stuff, that he'd been spending too much time in bars and needed to cut back. I believed him, but it hurt. I'd started to think of him as a real friend, and now he was slipping away just like everyone else in my life eventually did. So I leaned on Pensri more. She filled the gap Dave left. And she needed me. That felt important. She'd mentioned things in passing. Her grandson needed new school uniforms. The rent on her shop had gone up. Her motorbike needed repairs. She never asked directly. But I'd hear the strain in her voice, see the worry on her face, and I'd offer. I'd give her 5,000 baht, then another 5, then 10. She'd always protest, always say it was too much, but she'd take it, and I'd feel good. Like I was making a difference. Like I wasn't just some useless old man waiting to die. By the time I hit the 1-year mark in Chiang Mai, I'd given Pensri close to 60,000 baht. I didn't think of it as a loan or charity. I thought of it as what you do for people you care about, but my bank account was shrinking faster than I'd planned. I'd budgeted for about 40,000 baht a month, including rent, food, utilities, insurance, and some cushion for emergencies. But between helping Pensri and the occasional splurge, nights out with Dave before he went distant, I was spending closer to 55 or 60. My pension covered it, barely, but the savings I'd brought with me were dwindling. I told myself it was fine. I'd adjust. I'd cut back. I stopped going to my favourite coffee shop. Started making instant coffee at home. I ate cheaper meals, skipped the expat restaurants, stuck to street food. I told myself I was being smart, that I was prioritising what mattered. Then came the loan shark. Pensri showed up at my house one evening in tears. Real, heaving sobs. I'd never seen her like that. She said her daughter's husband had borrowed money from a loan shark months ago, before he lost his job, and now they were demanding repayment with interest, 25,000 baht, due in 2 weeks, or they'd threatened violence. She said she didn't know what to do, that she was terrified for her grandchildren. She said she'd been trying to scrape together the money, but she was still 10,000 short. She wasn't asking me. She was just telling me, the way you tell someone when you've run out of options and you need to say it out loud. I didn't hesitate. I told her I'd cover it. All of it. 25,000 baht. She looked at me like I'd just saved her life. She said she'd pay me back, that she'd find a way, that she'd never forget this. I told her not to worry about it. I told her family came first, and she was family to me now. She hugged me so tight I could feel her shaking. I felt like a hero. I felt like I'd done something that mattered. But 25,000 baht was nearly 1,200 Canadian dollars. It wiped out a chunk of what I had left in my Thai account. I'd need to transfer more from Canada, dip into the savings I'd been trying not to touch. I told myself it was fine. It was an emergency. Emergencies happen, but a quiet voice in the back of my head, the one that sounded like Sarah, kept saying, "This is a mistake. This is what they warned you about." I ignored it. I had to. Because if I listened to that voice, I'd have to admit I'd been played. And I couldn't admit that. Not yet. The party invitation came about 2 weeks later. Pensri said her sister was having a small gathering at her house, just family and a few friends, and she wanted me to come. She said it would be a chance for me to meet more people, to feel like part of the community. I was honoured. I'd been in Chiang Mai for over a year, and I'd never been invited to anything like that. It felt like acceptance. Like I'd finally crossed some invisible line from foreigner to friend. The party was on a Saturday night in late September, monsoon season. The air was thick and heavy, rain clouds hanging low but not quite breaking. Pensri gave me the address, a neighbourhood I'd never been to, on the outskirts of the city past the ring road. I took a Songthaeyu, one of those red pickup truck taxis, and the driver dropped me off on a narrow dirt road lined with wooden houses and stray dogs. I found the house, a modest single-storey place with a tin roof and a small covered porch. Music was playing inside, loud and cheerful. I could hear laughter. Pensri met me at the door, all smiles, and led me inside. There were maybe a dozen people there, mostly older Thai women sitting on plastic chairs and a few men standing in the corner drinking. Everyone was friendly. They smiled, waved, said hello in broken English. Pensri introduced me to her sister, a woman who looked older than Pensri, but had the same warm smile. She handed me a drink, something clear in a plastic cup. I assumed it was water or soda. I took a sip. It burned. "Lao Khao," someone said. "Thai whiskey." I smiled, nodded, took another sip. It tasted like paint thinner, but I didn't want to be rude. The night blurred after that. Someone kept refilling my cup. I tried to pace myself, but I'd also skipped dinner and the alcohol hit me harder than I expected. People were talking to me, mostly in Thai, and I'd smile and nod even though I didn't understand. Pensri stayed close at first, translating bits and pieces, but then she drifted off to talk to someone else. I remember feeling warm, happy, more relaxed than I'd felt in weeks. I remember laughing at something even though I didn't know what the joke was. I remember someone patting me on the back, saying something that sounded friendly, and then I remember nothing. The next thing I knew, I was waking up under fluorescent lights. Harsh, buzzing, painful. My head felt like it had been split open. My mouth was dry, tasted like metal and bile. I tried to sit up, but my body felt heavy, uncooperative. A voice spoke in rapid Thai. I blinked, tried to focus. A nurse. She was standing next to the bed, holding a clipboard, looking at me with a mix of concern and impatience. I tried to ask where I was, but my voice came out as a croak. A doctor came in a few minutes later. A young guy, maybe 40, with glasses and a tired expression. He spoke English, thank God, but slowly, like he was translating in his head as he went. He said I'd been brought in by emergency services. Someone had found me unconscious on the side of a road near the airport highway, about 10 kilometers from where the party had been. No ID, no phone, no wallet. Just an old foreign man in dirty clothes, unresponsive, barely breathing. They'd run tests, suspected overdose, possibly drugs mixed with alcohol, that they couldn't be sure without more expensive tests. They'd given me fluids, monitored me overnight, made sure I wasn't going to die. I was lucky, he said. Another hour and I might not have made it. I couldn't process it. I asked about my phone, my wallet. He shook his head. Nothing, just the clothes on my back. I asked how I'd gotten to the hospital. He said a passing motorist had called it in. I asked if anyone had come looking for me. He said, no, no one. I felt a cold, creeping dread settle into my chest. I asked how much the bill was. He handed me a paper. 68,000 baht, roughly 3,300 Canadian dollars. For emergency treatment, tests, overnight observation. I didn't have that in my Thai account. Not anymore. Not after helping Pentry. I asked if I could call someone. The doctor handed me a hospital phone. I tried to remember Dave's number. I couldn't. It had been saved in my phone, which was gone. I tried to remember Pensry's number. Same thing. I didn't know anyone else. Not a single person in this entire country whose number I'd memorized. I asked if I could call Canada. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. I called my bank, went through security questions, arranged an emergency transfer from my savings account. They said it would take 3 business days. 3 days. I was trapped in this hospital bed with no phone, no wallet, no way to contact anyone, waiting for money to clear so I could pay a bill I shouldn't have had in the first place. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I lay in that bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night over and over. The party, the drinks, the faces, Pensry's smile, and then nothing. A blank space where my memory should have been. I tried to make sense of it. Had I been drugged, robbed, or had I just gotten blackout drunk like a stupid old fool and wandered off? I wanted to believe the second option. But deep down, I knew. I knew what had happened. I just didn't want to admit it. When the transfer finally cleared, I paid the bill and checked myself out. I took a taxi back to my house. The whole ride, I kept hoping everything would be fine, that I'd walk in and my phone would be on the counter where I'd left it, that this had all been some terrible misunderstanding. But when I got to my street, my stomach dropped. The front door was ajar, not broken, just open, like someone had walked out and forgotten to close it behind them. I pushed the door open slowly, already knowing what I'd find. My laptop, gone. The small flat-screen TV I'd bought, gone. The spare cash I'd kept in a drawer, maybe 5,000 baht, gone. The safe where I kept my passport and a backup credit card, pried open, the card missing. My passport was still there, at least. But everything else of value was gone. I sat down on my bed, the springs creaking under my weight, and stared at the empty space where my laptop used to be. I felt numb, hollow, like someone had reached inside me and scooped out everything that mattered. I filed a police report the next day. 2 officers came to my house, looked around, took notes. They were polite but detached, like they'd seen this 100 times before. They asked if I knew who might have done it. I said no. They asked if I had any enemies. I almost laughed. Enemies. I was a 70-year-old retiree. I didn't have enemies. I had one friend and she'd disappeared. They said they'd investigate. I never heard from them again. I tried to find Pensry. I went to the laundry service. It was closed. Not temporarily, permanently. The shutters were down, a for rent sign taped to the door. I asked the shop next door, a little convenience store. The owner said Pensry had left weeks ago, said she was moving back to her village upcountry. No forwarding address, no phone number, just gone. I walked through the neighbourhood asking anyone who'd listen if they knew her, if they knew where she went. Most people shook their heads, said they didn't know her. One old woman laughed, said something in Thai I didn't understand, but the tone was clear. You fool. I finally tracked down Dave. Found him at a bar in Nimmenhamen, the same place we used to go. He looked older, more worn down. I sat down across from him and told him everything. The party, the hospital, the robbery, Pensry, disappearing. He listened without interrupting, sipping his beer, his face expressionless. When I finished, he sighed and said, "I tried to warn you, mate." I asked him if he thought Pendry had set me up. He shrugged. Probably, maybe not the whole thing, but enough. He said this happened all the time. Lonely expats, especially older ones, get befriended by someone who seems kind, who seems genuine. They build trust. They create dependence. And then, when the time's right, they take what they can and disappear. He said Pensry probably wasn't even her real name. He said the party, the drinks, the blackout, that was textbook. Slip something in the booze, wait till you're out cold, take your valuables, dump you somewhere far enough away that by the time you wake up, they're long gone. I felt sick. I asked him why he didn't push harder to warn me. He said he did. I just didn't listen. And he was right. He told me to be careful, to keep my wits about me, and I'd ignored him because I didn't want to believe it. I'd wanted to believe Pensry was different, that I was different, that I'd found real connection in this place. But I hadn't. I'd found a woman who needed money and saw an opportunity, and I'd handed it to her because I was desperate not to be alone. I did the math later that week. Between the money I'd given Pensry, the hospital bill, the stolen items, and the cost of replacing my laptop and phone, I'd lost close to 200,000 baht, nearly 10,000 Canadian dollars. Almost a quarter of my annual pension. My savings account back home, the one I'd been trying not to touch, was down to $12,000. I couldn't afford to stay in Chiang Mai anymore. Not at this rate. I'd have to move somewhere cheaper, cut my budget to nothing, or go home. I spent days trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to stay, to prove I could make it work. The one bad experience wouldn't break me. But every time I walked down the street, every time I saw a woman who looked even remotely like Pensry, I felt that twist in my gut. That mix of anger and shame and humiliation. I couldn't do it. I couldn't stay in a place that reminded me of how badly I'd failed. I found a room in a cheap Thai apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. 4,000 baht a month, no furniture. Shared bathroom down the hall. It was a step down from my little house, but it was all I could afford now. I moved in with the few things I had left, set up a mattress on the floor, and tried to rebuild some kind of life. But it wasn't the same. The magic was gone. The hope was gone. I was just surviving again, the same way I'd been surviving in Victoria, except now the first was doing it in a foreign country where I didn't speak the language and had no one I could trust. I kept thinking about what Dave had said, that I'd been warned, that I just didn't listen. And he was right, but it wasn't because I was stupid. It was because I was lonely. Loneliness makes you blind. It makes you ignore red flags, because the alternative, admitting you're alone, is too painful. Pensry had given me something I needed more than money. She'd made me feel seen. She'd made me feel like I mattered, and I paid for that feeling. Literally. I started making plans to go back to Canada. 6 months, I told myself. 6 months to save up enough for the flight and to have a bit of cushion when I landed. I'd move back into my house in Victoria, kick out the renters if I had to, and figure out what came next. Maybe I'd see Emily and Sarah more. Maybe I'd join a seniors centre, find some kind of community. Or maybe I'd just go back to being alone, except this time I'd know better than to think geography could fix it. The truth I'd learned, the truth I didn't want to admit, was that Thailand hadn't failed me. I'd failed myself. I'd come here thinking I could escape loneliness, thinking a warm climate and cheap rent and friendly faces would be enough. But loneliness isn't about where you are. It's about who you are. And I was still the same man I'd been in Victoria, just older, poorer, and a lot more foolish. That's Gerald's story. Painful, humbling, and uncomfortably real. Before you leave a comment saying he should have known better or that he was naive, I want you to think about what loneliness does to people. It makes them vulnerable. It makes them desperate for connection, for meaning, for proof that they still matter. And when someone offers that, even if the terms are unclear, even if the power dynamic is skewed, it's hard to say no. It's hard to protect yourself when what you need most is to be needed. Thailand can be a beautiful place to retire. It can be affordable, peaceful, full of genuine kindness. But it's also a place where being old and foreign and alone makes you visible in ways that aren't always safe, where poverty and desperation exist alongside paradise, and where the gap between what you have and what others need creates opportunities for exploitation. That's not unique to Thailand. That's human nature. That's what happens when wealth and vulnerability collide. Gerald asked himself the right question too late. If the money had stopped, would Pensri still have been there? And the answer, obvious in hindsight, was no. She wouldn't have, because their relationship, however genuine it felt, was built on an unequal foundation. He had resources. She needed them. And when those two things meet, friendship and transaction become impossible to separate. If you retired abroad, or planning to retire abroad, ask yourself that question now. Not with bitterness, not with cynicism, but with honesty. Who in your life would still be there if your financial situation changed? Who's there because they care about you? And who's there because you can help them? And if you can't answer that question confidently, then you need to build real relationships, learn the language, integrate into a community where you're not just a rich foreigner. Because the alternative is waking up in a hospital bed, alone, wondering how you got there. Gerald isn't a fool. He's a grieving widower who wanted one last chance at happiness. And that's human. That's all of us. The only difference is he's willing to admit what happened. He's willing to share his story, so maybe, just maybe, someone else won't make the same mistakes. That takes courage. And if his story makes you uncomfortable, if it makes you question your own situation, then good. That discomfort might just save you. Thanks for watching, Bargirl Baddies. If this story hit home, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, and let us know your thoughts. And remember, you're not alone. Others have walked this path. Others have learned these lessons the hard way. The question is, will you learn from them, or will you have to learn the hard way too? We'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves.